So I'll begin with the meditation on Sri Ramakrishna. Om Hridaya Kamala Matye Rajitam Nirvikalpam Sada Sadakila Bedati Shunyam Nityamanandamurtim Vimala Paramahamsam Ramakrishnam Bhajamaha Nirupamamati Sukshmam Nishprapancham Nirhiham Gagana Sadrisham Isham Sarvabhuta Triguna Rahita Satchit Brahmarupam Varenyam Vimala Paramahamsam Ramakrishnam Bhajamaha Vitaritum avatirnam jnana bhakti prashanti Pranaya galata chittam jiva dukkha sahishnu Drita sahaja samadhim chinmayam komalangam Vimala paramahamsam Ramakrishnam bhajamaha. This knower of Brahman, ever established in his own nature, full of wisdom, self-possessed and self-lighted, eternal, the very image of that Brahman who is pure bliss, shining ceaselessly in the lotus of the heart, one alone and without parts, pure and still. This Ramakrishna, Paramahamsa Supreme, we adore. Subtle, fine, and luminous, not even the shadow of the gross can ever reach him, for his purity is without parallel, untouched by Maya's webs of deceit, beyond the dark river of time and desire, vast as the sky, the Supreme Lord, the very essence of Brahman as existence and light. This Ramakrishna, Paramahamsa Supreme, we adore. Saturated with divine consciousness, his home is in all. He hears every cry. He knows every pain. Under the weight of his compassion, his heart can deny the need of none. Born to raise the world with teachings of knowledge, love, and peace. Born to bring mankind fresh songs of joy. This certain refuge of all, this Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, the Paramatman Supreme, we adore. So before we begin the reading of the Gospel, I'll read you a couple more things I have found about Sri Ramakrishna. I like to begin with various things that different people have written about him, people who actually saw him, and what they had to say, just a little thing so that you can think about it when we're reading this and try to see him in your heart. So this one, the first one I'm getting, is another one from Bhavatarini Ma, and she was a little girl that Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother actually almost treated like a daughter. And so she was around him a lot when she was very young. He initiated her when she was still a child. And she wrote a whole book. Well, she didn't write the book, but anyhow, people have recorded a book called The Divine Joy of Play, which are her reminiscences. And she was one of the last devotees of Sri Ramakrishna who actually saw Sri Ramakrishna, who was living. Actually, our Bhakti Prana met her. She lived her, the last days of her life in Varanasi. So here she says, I ran to him and climbed on his lap. He caught hold of me with his two hands and said, "You are becoming very naughty." I answered quickly, "You are naughty, you are naughty." He lifted his hand and said to me, "I will beat you." What did I do next? I pinched the flesh on his left hand a little and asked, "Will you beat me harder than this?" With very much affection, he pulled me tight to his chest. I was so touched by this affection that I sat quietly. Putting his hand on my head, he said, "Oh, Bhavatarani, people are calling me Thakur, God. What do you think?" Making a funny face, I replied, "Oh, Thakur, you are also my husband's guru." I had heard this everywhere. At home, Ma had said, in father-in-law's house, all say, Godaya Dada, respected brother, is Upen's guru. But as Thakur, I knew only Kali, Durga, or other gods and goddesses. Thakur did not say more. Seeing him so silent, I gave him a little shake and said, "Oh, Dada, Dada." His face was smiling. While I was looking at his face, I saw that a divine light was spreading out all around his head. Then I called out, "Dada, what is it that I am seeing?" A wave of light was flowing out of his whole body. Then I began to see myself engulfed in that divine light. I was afraid. "Oh, Dada." Saying this, I fell on his breast, senseless. So that was one of her experiences. And another, this is something that Holy Mother, an experience that Holy Mother had. Swami Sudbodhananda related this incident. One night in Jairambati, the master went to bed after supper, and afterwards Holy Mother had her supper and finished the housework. When she entered the master's room, she found a blazing light shining on the bed, but the bed was empty. She stood there the entire night with folded hands. At daybreak, the master emerged from the light and bowed down to Holy Mother, saying, "You have appeared in this form. Very good." So those are two first-hand accounts of Sri Ramakrishna. We are now on page 124 in the Gospel, and this is in the middle of a chapter called The Advice to Householders. At 9 o'clock in the morning, while the master was still sitting in his room, Mano Mohan arrived from Kanagar with some members of his family. In answer to Sri Ramakrishna's kind inquiries, Mano Mohan explained that he was taking them to Calcutta. The master said, "Today is the first day of the Bengali month, an inauspicious day for undertaking a journey. I hope everything will be well with you." With a smile, he began to talk about other matters. When Narendra and his friends had finished bathing in the Ganges, the master said to them earnestly, "Go to the Panchavati and meditate there under the banyan tree." After a while, Sri Ramakrishna came to them. M too was present. "Shall I give you something to sit on?" Sri Ramakrishna asked. At about 10:30, Narendra and his Brahmo friends were meditating. The master said to the Brahmo devotees, "In meditation, one must be absorbed in God. By merely floating on the surface of the water, can you reach the gems lying at the bottom of the sea?" Then he sang, "Taking the name of Kali, dive deep down, O mind, into the heart's fathomless depths, where many a precious gem lies hid. But never believe the bed of the ocean bare of gems. If in the first few dives you fail, with firm resolve and self-control, dive deep and make your way to Mother Kali's realm. Down in the ocean depths of heavenly wisdom lie the wondrous pearls of peace, O mind, and you yourself can gather them. If you but have a pure heart and follow the scripture's rule, within those ocean depths as well, 6 alligators lurk, lust, anger, and the rest, swimming about in search of prey. Smear yourself with the turmeric of discrimination. The very smell of it will shield you from their jaws. Upon the ocean bed lie strewn unnumbered pearls and precious gems. Plunge in, says Ram Prasad, and gather up handfuls of them. So here he refers to the 6 passions, and that are obstacles, of course, to spiritual life. And they're listed as lust, anger, greed, jealousy, delusion, and avarice. And in some other places, they're called the 8 fetters: fear, shame, hatred, pride of caste, secretiveness, pride of lineage, pride of good conduct, and grief. And the Tantrika sadhana lists them as aversion, shame, fear, doubt, disgust, attachment to caste or group, and attachment to good character and grief. Sri Ramakrishna also practiced a lot of sadhana to overcome these obstacles. One thing that he did was he cleaned latrines with his hair, which no Brahmin would do. I mean, he was a high caste Brahmin. And he practiced these things in order to overcome his pride of caste. And because that's one of the big obstacles, is when you have these feelings that you're different and you're better than other people. So Narendra and his friends came down from their seats on the raised platform of the Panchavati and stood near the master. He returned to his room with them. The master continued, "When you plunge into the water of the ocean, you may be attacked by alligators, but they won't touch you if your body is smeared with turmeric. There's no doubt that the 6 alligators, lust, anger, avarice, and so on, are within you in the heart's fathomless depth. But you can protect yourself with the turmeric of discrimination and renunciation. Then they won't touch you. What can you achieve by mere lecturing and scholarship without this discrimination and dispassion? God alone is real, and all else is unreal. God alone is substance, and all else non-entity. That is discrimination. First of all, set up God in the shrine of your heart, and then deliver lectures as much as you like. How will the mere repetition of the word Brahman profit you if you're not imbued with discrimination and dispassion? It's the empty sound of a conch shell. There lived in a village a young man named Padmalochan, and people used to call him Podo for short. In this village, there was a temple that was in very dilapidated condition, and it contained no image of God. Aswata and other plants sprang up in the ruins of its walls, and bats lived inside. The people of the village had stopped visiting the temple. One day, however, after dusk, the villagers heard the sound of a conch shell from the direction of the temple, and they thought perhaps someone had installed an image in the shrine and was performing the evening worship. One of them softly opened the door and saw Padmalochan standing in a corner blowing the conch, but no image had been set up. The temple hadn't been swept or washed, and filth and dirt lay everywhere. Then he shouted to Podo, "Have you set up no image here within the shrine, O fool? Blowing the conch, you simply make confusion worse, confounded. Day and night, 11 bats scream there incessantly. There's no use in merely making a noise. If you want to establish the deity in the shrine of your heart, if you want to please God, first purify the mind. In the pure heart, God takes his seat. One can bring the holy image into the temple. He cannot bring the holy image into the temple if the droppings of bats are all around. The 11 bats are our 11 organs, 5 of action and 5 of perception, and the mind. First of all, invoke the deity, and then give lectures to your heart's content. First, dive deep. Plunge to the bottom and gather up the gems. And then you can do other things, but nobody wants to plunge. People are without spiritual discipline and prayer, without renunciation and dispassion. They learn a few words and immediately start to deliver lectures. It's difficult to teach others. Only if a man gets a command from God after realizing him is he entitled to teach. Thus conversing, the master came to the west end of the veranda. M stood by his side. Sri Ramakrishna had repeated again and again that God cannot be realized without discrimination and renunciation. This made M extremely worried. He had married, and he was a young man of 28, educated in college in the Western way. Having a sense of duty, he asked himself, do discrimination and dispassion mean giving up woman and gold? He was really at a loss to know what to do. M to the master, what should one do if one's wife says, you are neglecting me, I will commit suicide? Master, in a serious tone, give up such a wife. If she proves an obstacle in the way of spiritual life, let her commit suicide or anything else if she likes. The wife that hampers her husband's spiritual life is an ungodly wife. Immersed in deep thought, M stood leaning against the wall. Narendra and the other devotees remained silent a few minutes. The master exchanged several words with them, and then suddenly going to M, he whispered in his ear, but if a man has sincere love for God, then all come under his control, the king, wicked persons, and his wife. Sincere love of God on the husband's part may eventually help the wife to lead a spiritual life. If the husband is good, then through the grace of God, the wife may also follow his example. This had a most soothing effect on M's worried mind. All the while he had been thinking, let her commit suicide? What can I do? M to the master, this world is a terrible place indeed. Actually, there's many examples where the wife also had a husband who was, there was a couple where he was a drunkard, and they prayed, and sometimes it took a long time, but they were able to bring them around to spiritual life. So there's a book that Swami Chaitananda wrote that has several of those examples in it. On another occasion, the master said to him privately, yes, there's no hope for a worldly man if he's not sincerely devoted to God, but he has nothing to fear if he remains in the world after realizing God. Nor does a man need to have any fear whatsoever of the world if he attains sincere devotion by practicing spiritual discipline now and then in solitude. Chaitanya had several householders among his devotees, but they were householders in name only, for they lived unattached to the world. It was noon. The worship was over, and the food offerings had been made in the temple. The doors of the temple were shut. Sri Ramakrishna sat down for his meal, and Narendra and the other devotees partook of the food offering from the temple. Sunday, October 22nd, 1882. It was the day of Vijaya, the last day of the celebration of the worship of Durga, when the clay image is immersed in the water of a lake or a river. We just celebrated Durga Puja here, so it's around this time. About 9 o'clock in the morning, M was seated on the floor of the master's room at Dakshineswar, near Sri Ramakrishna, who was reclining on the small couch. Rakshakai was then living with the master, and Narendra and Bhavanath visited him frequently. Balarama had seen him only once or twice. Master, did you have any holiday during Durga Puja? M. Yes, sir. I went to Keshav's house every day for the first 3 days of the worship. Master, is that so? M. I heard there a very interesting interpretation of the Durga Puja. Master, please tell us about it. M. Keshav Sen held daily morning prayers in his house, lasting till 10 or 11. During these prayers, he gave the inner meaning of the Durga Puja. He said that if anyone could realize the Divine Mother, that is to say, could install Durga in the shrine of his heart, then Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kartika, and Ganesh would come there of themselves. Lakshmi means wealth, Saraswati, knowledge, Kartika, strength, and Ganesh, success. By realizing the Divine Mother within one's heart, one gets all these without any effort whatsoever. Sri Ramakrishna listened to the description, questioning him now and then about the prayers conducted by Keshav. At last he said to him, "Don't go hither and thither. Come here alone. Those who belong to the inner circle of my devotees will come only here. Boys like Narendra, Bhavanath, and Rakshakai are my very intimate disciples. They are not to be thought of lightly. Feed them one day." What do you think of Narendra? The advice to feed the young boys, it's considered very auspicious to feed a holy man or someone who is very pure and living a spiritual life. How are you getting along with your meditation nowadays? What aspects of God appeal to your mind, with form or without form? M. Sir, now I can't fix my mind on God with form. On the other hand, I can't concentrate steadily on God without form. Master, now you see that the mind cannot be fixed all of a sudden on the formless aspect of God. It is wise to think of God with form during the primary stages. M. Do you mean to suggest that one should meditate on a clay image? Master, why clay? These images are the embodiment of consciousness. M. Even so, one must think of hands, feet, and other parts of the body. But again, I realize that the mind cannot be concentrated unless one meditates in the beginning on God with form. You have told me so. Well, can God easily assume different forms? May one meditate on the form of one's own mother? Master, yes, the mother should be adored. She is indeed the embodiment of Brahman. M. sat in silence. After a few moments, he asked the master, "What does one feel while thinking of God without form? Isn't it possible to describe it?" After some reflection, the master said, "Do you know what it's like?" He remained silent for a moment, and then said a few words to M about one of his experiences at the time of the vision of God without form. Master, you see, one must practice spiritual discipline to understand this correctly. Suppose there are treasures in a room. If you want to see them and lay hold of them, you must take the trouble to get the key and unlock the door. After that, you must take the treasures out. But suppose the room is locked and standing outside the door you say to yourself, "Here, I've opened the door, Now I've broken the lock of the chest. Now I've taken out the treasure. Such brooding near the door will not enable you to achieve anything. You must practice discipline. The Jnanis think of God without form. They don't accept the divine incarnation. Praising Sri Krishna, Arjuna said, "Thou art Brahman absolute." Sri Krishna replied, "Follow me, and you will know whether or not I am Brahman absolute." So saying, Sri Krishna led Arjuna to a certain place and asked him what he saw there. "I see a huge tree," said Arjuna, "and on it I noticed the fruits hanging down like clusters of blackberries. Clusters of blackberries." Then Krishna said to Arjuna, "Come nearer, and you will find these are not clusters of blackberries, but clusters of innumerable Krishnas, like me, hanging from the tree." In other words, the divine incarnations without number appear and disappear on the tree of absolute Brahman. Kabir Das was strongly inclined to worship the formless God, and at the mention of Krishna's name he would say, "Why should I worship him?" The gopis would clap their hands while he performed a monkey dance with a smile. But I accept God with form when I am in the company of people who believe in that ideal, and I also agree with those who believe in the formless God. M, smiling. You are as infinite as he of whom we have been talking. Truly, no one can fathom your depth. Master, smiling. Ah, I see you have found it out. Let me tell you one thing. One should follow various paths. One should practice each creed for a time. In a game of satrancha, a piece can't reach the center square until it completes the circle. But once in the square, it can't be overtaken by any other piece. M. Yes, that is true, sir. Master, there are two classes of yogis, the Vahudakas and the Kutichakas. The Vahudaka roam about visiting various holy places and have not yet found peace of mind. But the Kutichakas, having visited all the sacred places, have quieted their minds. Feeling serene and peaceful, they settle down in one place and they no longer move about. In that one place, they are happy. They don't feel the need of going to any sacred place. If one of them ever visits a place of pilgrimage, it's only for the purpose of new inspiration. I had to practice different religions for a time. Hinduism, Islam, Christianity. Furthermore, I followed the path of the Shaktas, Vaishnavas, Vedantas. I realized that there is only one God, toward whom all are traveling, but the paths are different. While visiting the holy places, I would sometimes suffer great agony. Once I went with Mathur to Raja Babu's drawing room in Benares. I found there they were talking about worldly matters, money, real estate, and the like, and at this I burst into tears. I said to the Divine Mother, weeping, "Mother, where hast thou brought me? I was much better off at Dakshineswar." In Allahabad, I noticed the same things that I saw elsewhere, the same ponds, the same grass, the same trees, the same tamarind leaves. But one undoubtedly finds inspiration in holy places. I accompanied Mathur Babu to Vrindavan. Hriday and the ladies of Mathur's house were in our party. No sooner did I see the Kali Dhammagat than the divine emotion surged up within me and I was completely overwhelmed. Hriday used to bathe me there as if I were a small child. At dusk, I would walk on the bank of the Jamuna. when the cattle returned along the sandy banks from their pasture. At the very sight of those cows, the thought of Krishna would flash in my mind. I would run along like a madman crying, "Oh, where is Krishna? Where is my Krishna?" I went to Shamakunda and Radhakunda in a palanquin and got out to visit the holy Mount Godardhan. At the very sight of the mountain, I was overpowered with divine emotion, and I ran up to the top. I lost all consciousness of the world around me. The residents of the place helped me to come down. On my way to the sacred pools of Shamakund and Radhakund, when I saw the meadows, the trees, the shrubs, the birds, and the deer, I was overcome with ecstasy. My clothes became wet with tears. I said, "Oh, Krishna, everything here is as it was in the olden days. You alone are absent." Seated inside the palanquin, I lost power of speech. Hriday followed the palanquin. He had warned the bears to be careful about me. Gnanamaya became very fond of me in Vrindavan. She was an old woman who lived all alone in a hut near Nidudvan. Referring to my spiritual condition and ecstasy, she said, "He's the very embodiment of Radha." She addressed me as Dulali. When with her, I used to forget my food and drink, my bath, and even the thought of going home. Some days, Hriday used to bring me food from home and feed me. Gnanamaya also would come serve me with food prepared by her own hands. Gnanamaya used to experience trances. At such times, a great crowd would gather and come to see her. One day, in a state of ecstasy, she climbed on Hriday's shoulders. I didn't want to leave her and return to Calcutta. Everything was arranged for me to stay with her. I was to eat double-boiled rice, and we were to have our beds on either side of the cottage. All the arrangements had been made when Hriday said, "You have such a weak stomach. Who will look after you?" "Why," said Gnanamaya, "I shall look after him. I shall nurse him." As Hriday dragged me by one hand, she by the other, I remembered my mother, who was then living alone here in the Nahabad of the temple garden. I found it impossible to stay away from her and said to Gnanamaya, "No, I must go." I loved the atmosphere of Vrindavan. At about 11 o'clock, the master took his meal, the offerings from the temple of Kali. After taking his noonday rest, he resumed conversation with the devotees. Every now and then he uttered the holy words, Om, as he repeated the sacred names of the deity. After sunset, the evening worship was performed in the temples. Since it was the day of Vijaya, the devotees first saluted the Divine Mother and then took the dust of the Master's feet. Tuesday, October 24th, 1882. It was 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The Master was standing near the shelf where the food was kept when Balarama and M arrived from Calcutta and saluted him. Sri Ramakrishna said to them with a smile, "I was going to take some sweets from the shelf, but no sooner did I put my hand out for them than a lizard dropped on my body. At once I removed my hand." Everybody laughs. To have a lizard drop on your body is considered very inauspicious. So that was why. Oh yes, one should observe all these things. You see, Rakshakai is ill and my limbs ache too. Do you know what the matter is? This morning as I was leaving my bed, I saw a certain person who I took for Rakshakai. Everybody laughed. The Orthodox Hindus in Bengal believe that the first face seen in the morning indicates whether the day will bring good or evil. Oh, yes. Physical features should be studied. The other day, Narendra brought one of his friends, a man with only one good eye, though the other eye was not totally blind. I said to myself, what is this trouble that Narendra has brought with him? A certain person comes here, but I can't eat any food that he brings. He works in an office at a salary of 20 rupees and earns another 20 by writing false bills. I can't utter a word in his presence because he tells lies. Sometimes he stays here 2 or 3 days without going to his office. Can you guess his purpose? It is that I should recommend him to someone for a job somewhere else. Balarama comes from a family of devout Vaishnavas. His father, now an old man, is a pious devotee. He has a tuft of hair on his head, a rosary of tulsi beads around his neck, and a string of beads in his hand. He devotes his time to the repetition of God's name. He owns much property in Orissa and has built temples to Radhakrishna in Kotar, Vrindavan, and other places, and established free guest houses as well. To Balarama. A certain person came here the other day. I understood he was a slave of his wife. Why is it that people do not serve God? It is because of the barrier of woman and gold, lust and greed. How impudent he was to say to you the other day, a Paramahamsa came to my father who fed him with chicken curry. That's considered for Orthodox Hindus. You're not supposed to eat chicken. In my present state of mind, I can eat a little fish soup if it's been offered to the Divine Mother beforehand. I can't eat any meat, even if it's offered to the Divine Mother, but I taste it with the end of my finger, lest she should be angry. Everyone laughs. On Kali Puja, they offer goat meat at the Kali temples, and it's considered Mahaprasad. Well, can you explain the state of my mind? Once when I was going from Burdwan to Kamarpukur in a bullock cart, a great storm arose. Some people gathered near the cart. My companions said they were robbers, so I began to repeat the names of God, calling sometimes on Kali, sometimes on Rama, sometimes on Hanuman. What do you think of that? Was the Master hinting that God is one, but is addressed by different names, by different sects? Master to Balarama. Maya is nothing but lust and greed. A man living in its midst gradually loses his spiritual alertness. He thinks all is well with him. The scavenger carries a tub of night soil on his head, and in the course of time he loses his repulsion to it. One gradually acquires love of God through the practice of chanting God's name and glories. To M. One should not be ashamed of chanting God's holy name. As the saying goes, one does not succeed so long as one has these three: shame, hatred, and fear. At Kamarpukur, they sang kirtan very well. The devotional music is sung to the accompaniment of drums. To Balarama. Have you installed any image at Vrindavan? Balarama. Yes, sir. We have a grove where Krishna is worshipped. Master. I have been to Vrindavan. The Nidhu Grove is very nice indeed. So we're beginning another chapter, and this chapter is called The Master and Keshab. October 22nd, 1882. It was Friday, the day of Lakshmi Puja. I was just going to make an aside that Lakshmi Puja, Jagadatri Puja, Durga Puja, they all come right around the same time. there are many forms of the Divine Mother are worshipped, just as we're seeing in our temple here, with Kali Puja coming up next. At about 4 o'clock, Keshab Chandra Sen had arranged a boat trip to the Ganges for Sri Ramakrishna. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the steamboat with Keshab and his Brahmo followers cast anchor on the Ganges alongside the Kali temple at Dakshineswar. The passengers saw in front of them the bathing ghat and the Chandi. To their left, in the temple compound, stood 6 temples of Shiva, and to the right, another group of 6 Shiva temples. The white steeple of the Kali temple, the tree tops of the Panchavati, and the silhouette of the pine trees stood high against the blue autumn sky. The gardens between the 2 Nahabats were filled with fragrant flowers, and along the bank of the Ganges were rows of flowering plants. The blue sky was reflected in the brown water of the river, the sacred Ganges, associated with the most ancient traditions of Arya civilization. The outer world appeared soft and serene, and the hearts of the Brahma devotees were filled with peace. Sri Ramakrishna was in his room, talking with Vijay and Harilal. Some devotees of Keshab entered. Bowing before the master, they said to him, "Sir, the steamer has arrived. Keshab Babu has asked us to take you there." A small boat was brought to carry the master to the steamer. No sooner did he get into the boat than he lost outward consciousness in samadhi. Vijaya was with him. M was among the passengers. As the boat came along the steamer, all rushed to the railing to have a view of Sri Ramakrishna. Keshab became anxious to get him safely on board. With great difficulty, the master was brought back to consciousness of the world and taken to a cabin in the steamer. Still in an abstracted mood, he walked mechanically, leaning on a devotee for support. Keshab and the others bowed before him, but he was not aware of them. Inside the cabin were very few chairs and a table, and he was made to sit on one of the chairs. Keshab and Vijaya occupying 2 others. Some devotees were also seated, most of them on the floor, while many others had to stand outside, and they peered eagerly through the door and windows. Sri Ramakrishna again went into a deep samadhi and became totally unconscious of the outer world. As the air in the room was stuffy because of the crowd of people, Keshab opened the windows. He was embarrassed to meet Vijay since they had differed on certain principles in the Brahmo Samaj, and Vijaya had separated himself from Keshab's organization, joining another society. The Brahmo devotees looked wistfully at the master. Gradually he came back to a sense of consciousness, but the divine intoxication still lingered. He said to himself in a whisper, "Mother, why have you brought me here? They are hedged around and not free. Can I free them?" Did the master find that the people assembled there were locked within the prison walls of the world? Did their helplessness make the master address these words to the Divine Mother? Ramakrishna was gradually becoming conscious of the outside world. Nimal Dav of Ghazipur, a Brahmo Samaj, and a Brahmo Samaj were talking about Parvati Baba. Another Brahmo devotee said to the master, "Sir, these gentlemen visit Pavari Baba. He lives in Ghazipur. He's a holy man, like yourself." The master could hardly talk. He only smiled. The devotee continued, "Sir, Pavari Baba keeps your photograph in his room." Pointing to his body, the master said with a smile, "Just a pillowcase." The master continued, But you should remember that the heart of the devotee is the abode of God. He dwells, no doubt, in all beings, but he especially manifests himself in the heart of the devotee. A landlord may at one time or another visit all parts of his estate, but people say he's generally to be found in a particular drawing room. The heart of the devotee is the drawing room of God. He who is called Brahman by the Jnanis is known as Atman by the Yogis and as Bhagavan by the Bhaktas. The same Brahman is called priest when worshipping in a temple and cook when preparing a meal in the kitchen. The Jnani, sticking to the path of knowledge, always reasons about reality, saying, not this, not this. Brahman is neither this nor that. It's not the universe nor its living beings. Reasoning in this way, the mind becomes steady. Then it disappears and the aspirant goes into samadhi. This is the knowledge of Brahman. It is the unwavering conviction in the Jnani that Brahman alone is real and the world is illusory. All these names and forms are illusory, like a dream. What Brahman is cannot be described. One cannot even say that Brahman is a person. This is the opinion of the Jnanis, the followers of Vedanta philosophy. But the Bhaktas accept all the states of consciousness. They take the waking state to be real also. They don't think the world to be illusory like a dream. They say that the universe is the manifestation of God's power and glory. God has created all these: sky, stars, moon, sun, mountains, ocean, men, animals. They constitute His glory. He is within us. He is in our hearts. Again, He is outside. The most advanced devotees say that He Himself has become all this, the 24 cosmic principles, the universe, and all living beings. The devotees of God want to eat sugar, not to become sugar. Everyone laughed. Do you know how a lover of God feels? His attitude is, O God, Thou art the master, I am Thy servant. Thou art the mother, I am Thy child. Thou art my father and my mother. Thou art the whole, I am a part. He doesn't like to say I am Brahman. The yogi seeks to realize the Paramahamsa, the Supreme Soul. His ideal is a union of the embodied soul and the Supreme Soul. He withdraws his mind from the sense objects and tries to concentrate it on the Paramahamsa. Therefore, during the first stage of his spiritual discipline, he retires in solitude and with an undivided attention practices meditation in a fixed posture. But the reality is one and the same. The difference is only in name. He who is Brahman is verily Atman. And again, he is the Bhagavan. He is Brahman to the followers of the path of knowledge, Paramatman to the yogis, and Bhagavan to the lovers of God. The steamer had been going toward Calcutta, but the passengers, with their eyes fixed on the master and their ears given to his nectar-like words, were oblivious of his motion. Dakshineswar, with its temples and gardens, was left behind. The paddles of the boat churned the waters of the Ganges with a murmuring sound. But the devotees were indifferent to all this. Spellbound, they looked on a great yogi, his face lighted with a divine smile, his countenance radiating love, his eyes sparkling with joy, a man who had renounced all for God, who knew nothing but God, Unceasing words of wisdom flowed from his lips. Master. The Jnanis who adhere to the non-dualistic philosophy of Vedanta say that the acts of creation, preservation, and destruction, the universe itself and all its living beings, are the manifestation of Shakti, the divine power. If you reason it out, you will realize that all these are as illusory as a dream. Brahman alone is reality, and all else is unreal. Even this very Shakti is unsubstantial, like a dream. But, though you reason all your life, unless you are established in samadhi, you cannot go beyond the jurisdiction of Shakti. Even when you say, I am meditating, or I am contemplating, still you are moving in the realm of Shakti with its power. Thus, Brahman and Shakti are identical. If you accept the one, you must accept the other. It's like fire and its power to burn. If you see the fire, you must recognize its power to burn also. You cannot think of fire without its power to burn. Nor can you think of the power to burn without fire. You cannot conceive of the sun's rays without the sun, nor can you conceive of the sun without its rays. What is milk like? Oh, you say it's something white. You cannot think of the milk without the whiteness. And again, you cannot think of whiteness without the milk. Thus, one cannot think of Brahman without Shakti, or of Shakti without Brahman. One cannot think of the Absolute without the relative, or of the relative without the Absolute. The primordial power is ever at play. She is creating, preserving, and destroying in play, as it were. This power is called Kali. Kali is verily Brahman. Brahman is verily Kali. It is one and the same reality. When we think of it as inactive, that is to say, not engaged in the act of creation, preservation, and destruction, then we call it Brahman. But when it engages in these activities, then we call it Kali, or Shakti. The reality is one and the same. The difference is in name and form only. It's like water, called in different languages by different names, such as Jal, Pani, and so forth. There are 3 or 4 ghats on a lake. The Hindus who drink water from one place call it Jal. The Muslim in another place call it Pani. And the English in a third place call it water. All 3 denote one and the same thing, the difference being in name only. In the same way, some address the reality as Allah, some as God, some as Brahman, some as Kali, and others by such names as Rama, Jesus, Durga, Hari. Keshav with a smile. Describe to us, sir, how in many ways Kali, the Divine Mother, sports in this world. Master with a smile. Oh, she plays in different ways. It is she alone who is known as Mahakali, Nityakali, Shamaskali, Rakshakai, Shamakali, Mahakali, Nityakali are mentioned in the Tantra philosophy, where there were neither creation, nor the sun, nor the moon, planets, and earth. When darkness was enveloped in darkness, then the Mother, the formless one, Mahakali, the great power, was one with Mahakala, the Absolute. Shamakali has a somewhat tender aspect and is worshipped in the Hindu households. She's the dispenser of boons and the dispeller of fear. People worship Rakshakai, the protectress in times of epidemic and famine, earthquake, drought, and flood. Shamaschana, Mahakali is the embodiment of the power of destruction. She resides in the cremation grounds, surrounded by corpses, jackals, and terrible spirits. From her mouth flows a stream of blood, and from her neck hangs a garland of human heads, and around her waist is a girdle made of human hands. After the destruction of the universe, at the end of the great cycle, the Divine Mother garners the seeds for the next creation. She, like the elderly mistress of the house, who has a hodgepodge pot in which she keeps different articles for household use. Everyone laughs. Oh yes. Housewives have pots like that where they keep seafoam, blue pills, small bundles of seeds of cucumbers, pumpkin and gourd, and so on. They take them out when they want them. In the same way, after the destruction of the universe, my Divine Mother, the embodiment of Brahman, gathers together the seeds for the next creation. After the creation, the primordial power dwells in the universe itself. She brings forth this phenomenal world and then pervades it. In the Vedas, creation is likened to a spider and its web. The spider brings the web out of itself, and then it remains in it. God is the container of the universe, and also what is contained in it. Is Kali, my Divine Mother, of black complexion? She appears black because she is viewed from a distance, but when intimately known, she no longer is so. The sky appears blue at a distance, but look at it close by and you will find it has no color. The water of the ocean looks blue at a distance, but when you go near and take it in your hand, you will find that it is colorless. The master had become intoxicated with divine love, and he's saying, "Is Kali, my mother, really black? The naked one of blackest hue lights the lotus of the heart." So I think I'll end there since we're going into Kali Puja time, and that seemed like a good spot. I was just going to mention where I used to live in the convent in San Francisco. We used to sing a song that went something like this. How soothing it is, something wondrous hidden in it that makes thy name so sweet. So sweet. When I am absorbed in thy name, perfect beauty radiates from every side, and love overspreads the world. Love, pure love. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishaste. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is he still the same.